Hello everyone, Taylor Drake here with New Horizons Ministries. Thanks for joining us in our book review of The Pedagogical Theory of the Hebrew Bible, written by Dr. Adrian E. Hinkle, who is currently employed at Southwestern Christian University and who is an IPHC member. This has been a really fun read. It's also been a very convicting read. This is not a book about pastoring, which I think is really important. This is not a book about ministry. This is a literary analysis of how the Bible was written, composed, and edited. Now, some of you may be kind of, oh, the Bible was edited or composed, and that's part of it, but if you gloss over that part, I think we'll be just fine. This was a very challenging read. It was also a very encouraging read, and what I'd like to do is interpret this not from a literary standpoint, because I think a lot of people have already done that. A lot of the reviews that I've read just praise this book for its literary analysis of the Bible, especially in how the Bible teaches us about how to teach about God. And I really want to ask pastors a question, because I think this is a book of really good content for ministers. And I would encourage you to read this book, because I think it asks one really important question of pastors, and here it is. Are you rightly teaching about who God is? Are you rightly teaching about who God is? Now, that may seem like, oh, well, yeah, we're talking about the content. We're talking about God's character, His nature, His interaction with humanity, and that is actually not at all what I'm talking about or what I'm discussing. I'm not asking about the content of your teaching. I'm actually talking about the method. See, the pedagogical theory of the Hebrew Bible proposes this idea that the Bible not only teaches us who God is, but that the Bible teaches us how to teach about God. It's not just, here's God, and we throw it out to the masses and we hope people understand Him, that we hand them the New Testament with the Psalms when they get saved and we hope for the best, or that, you know, they check out some sermons online off and on and maybe they get some things and maybe they don't. And you know, best of luck. That's not what this is about. This isn't about content. This is about method. Because as one of my favorite theologians said, the method is the message. It's not just what we teach. It's not just what, not just the content of your teaching about God's character and His nature, but it's also about how you teach about what you teach. And I think that's one of the most important points of this book, especially for pastors. The Bible teaches us how to teach about God. And it does it in 4 ways, and this is a summary of this book. The verbiage is mine, but the content is within the book by Dr. Hinkle. In 4 ways, the Bible teaches us how to teach about God in 4 ways. One of the dominant methods, especially in the Old Testament, is going to be remembering. Remember what God has done. Looking back, reflecting, looking at His actions, because the Old Testament God, there's not a lot of physical interaction with the God and His people in His person or His being, in the sense of, you know, you meet a person, we shake their hands. That's a physical contact. We don't see that happening in the Old Testament often, if ever, but we remember His works. We remember what He has done. And you look at the prophets and you look at the wisdom literature, and even in David's writing in the Deuteronomistic history, we get to see that a lot of people are saying, no, look back and remember, because remembering what God has done is the first step on how we teach about how we teach about God. Now, when we remember, it leads us to the next part, which is retelling. We remember what He has done, and then we retell those stories. It's not just, oh, I tell the story and then you move on. No, we retell the stories. We remember what has happened, and then we retell the stories over and over and over again. This point is made in the book that when parents are commissioned and commanded by God to teach about Himself to their children, He tells them, retell them the stories. Don't just remember, now tell your children, which makes the parents remember, and then they retell those stories. In fact, if you look in the New Testament, we retell the Gospels over and over and over again. The teachings of Christ, the kingdom of heaven is like this, and He tells the story again. We remember and then we retell. But in retelling, there's a subtle difference between retelling and the third thing, rehearing. It's not enough just to remember. It's not enough just to retell, but now we have to re-listen. We have to re-hear. We need to be reminded. We remember, we retell, and then we ourselves absorb. We rehear the messages and the stories, because the stories are the lessons. A lot of the times we will dig in and go, oh, what does this mean? What is the story trying to tell us? And in reality, the story itself may be the very lesson. Not often in Scripture do we see God saying, oh, by the way, here's the moral of my interaction. It simply says God was pleased or he was displeased. It doesn't always say why, but it always says pleased, displeased, and here are the consequences, good or bad. We remember what he has done. This propels us to retell the stories, but then we don't just retell, we rehear, we re-listen. And then, last but not least, we rehearse. We practice obedience. We're not just obedient to God, but we practice obedience. It's important to know that in the pedagogical theory of the Hebrew Bible, it's not just, oh, I'm teaching myself. This is a generational thing. This is a communal thing. This is parent to child who becomes a parent to a child, and the grandparents also teach the child, but then the parents also kind of learn from the kids as well. So we see that teaching us about how to teach about God and teaching each other about how to teach about God isn't just a downward motion. It's cyclical. It's generations teaching generations, but sometimes it's from the younger generation to the older generation. We rehearse, we practice obedience. And once again, the most important form of obedience in the Old Testament is trusting God, believing he is who he says he is, actually acknowledging his existence. Because if there really is a God, and he actually does interact with his people, and we remember what he has done in the past, and we retell the things that he has done, and we rehear and we re-listen to these stories and these events, then that propels us to trust and obey. The pedagogical theory of the Hebrew Bible not only reminds us that as Christians, obedience is important, but it also reminds us how we become obedient. We don't just magically become obedient. We don't just start obeying because we're Christians. No. This is an interesting relationship that we have with Christ. And pastors, I encourage you, not just to your congregation, but also in your own life, ask yourself the question, am I rightly teaching about who God is? Again, content is really, really important, but so is method. According to the pedagogical theory of the Hebrew Bible by Dr. Adrian Hinkle, it's not just enough to teach about God, but rather the Bible teaches us how to teach about God. And I think that there's a lot to learn about how to teach, about how we teach about God. Thank you again, Dr. Adrian Hinkle, for a wonderful book and for putting up with me all through college. I know I probably wasn't the most enjoyable of students, but hey, I'm reviewing your book, and I actually understood it. So you did something right, that I can actually understand what you were writing. And I encourage ministers, please check this out. You can find it on Amazon. It's the first book in a series that's going to be coming out about the pedagogical theory of the whole Hebrew Bible. This is kind of an overview, especially of the history, the Torah, the Pentateuch, and the history in the Old Testament. Our next book is going to be The Pastor Theologian, Resurrecting an Ancient Vision by Gerald Heiston and Todd Wilson. This is going to be exploring the idea that probably actually the misconception that you're either a pastor or you're a theologian. And yet in the early church fathers, you were both. And is that even possible for today? Well, I guess you'll have to find out next time when we review The Pastor Theologian. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Taylor Drake with New Horizons Ministries. Blessings and happy reading.